8 years ago, my husband and I bought a small house in a new cottage village. A beautiful coniferous forest almost under the windows, a clean lake, a bright sky, and a great mood from a successful investment of money. We didn't take long to settle in. We wallpapered, and all the appliances and furniture were brought from the old apartment. The strangeness began on the very first night. Noise, creaking floorboards, some kind of inexplicable draft, even though the house is absolutely new. Having heard stories about the house spirit, I was touched and even left him milk and cookies. However, the sounds did not stop. Then we decided to consecrate the dwelling. The priest performed the ceremony. The creaking seemed to subside. But about a week later, my husband complained about a dream. He dreamed of a man. He asked to bury him humanely, as they buried him like a dog. At first, I didn't pay attention. I thought he watched too many movies, but when I had the same dream, I was seriously alarmed. I called the developer company. They told me that there were no cemeteries on the site. When our daughter and son-in-law came to visit, the story repeated with them. Periodically, over the course of 2 months, we dreamed of different people. We described them to each other as much as we could remember, asking them to bury them. I was completely tired of this mysticism and devilry, and invited a local fortune teller from the village. The old woman walked around, waved her hands, whispered some words. In the end, she said that there is bad energy, but nothing specific. Then I took up the work myself. I went to the regional archive, made a request for the history of the Yampolsky district, and our area specifically. A month later, I received the results. It turned out that somewhere within the boundaries of the village, according to reconnaissance data, there were mass graves of Soviet soldiers. During the war, the Germans threw the dead and shot prisoners into them. After consulting with my husband, I invited archaeologists. It was impossible to spend the night in the house anyway, so we took a risk. The excavations showed the presence of a deep 3 meters mass grave 6 meters from the wall of our dwelling. The team of professionals worked for a very long time. Some remains were even identified and relatives were notified. In total, about 27 skeletons were found. After the funeral and reburial, the dream stopped. Now I believe that the afterlife and the soul exist. Soldiers from there asked for help in our dreams, and I am glad that I was able to help their souls find peace. The old woman in the garden. I live in the village of Kostino in the Moscow region. The village is small, there won't even be 100 people. I don't have a husband, he died 4 years ago. I live alone. The children have grown up and live separately. That day I woke up very early because I was suffering from insomnia. It was about 4:30 in the morning. There was a thick fog. At that time, the strawberry flowering season began. Having woken up, I got up and decided to take a gulp of fresh air. Coming out of the house onto the porch, I saw a strange picture. An old woman about 50 years old was picking strawberries in my garden. Moreover, she was dressed very strangely in a red robe with a strange hat on her head and unclear shoes in the fashion of the 1940s. I shouted in bewilderment for her to leave swearing. After she turned around and noticed me, I saw her dark black eyes and an expression of fear on her face. From what I saw after that, I was in deep shock. The old woman's legs somehow bent, not at the knee, but in the opposite direction, and jumping over the fence, she disappeared. Realizing that this was some kind of devilry, I flew into the house, took valerian and lay down to rest. I was shaking with fear. Waking up at 10 o'clock, I went out onto the street with the same fear and great curiosity and saw the same old woman picking strawberries, but already in different clothes. Numb with fear, I started reading a prayer, after which the old woman, having croaked something swearing, for some reason fell to the ground and disappeared. And she never appeared again. I started to get very sick, lost weight, and even prepared to die. I knew for sure that I had a serious spoilage. I asked a friend about what I saw. She replied that at the edge of the village there is a boarded-up house in which every night you can hear sounds, wild screams, whistles. Everything that caused me wild fear passed after the local men burned down this damn house. Apartment in Maykop. My name is Sergey. I live in the Republic of Adizia, in the city of Maykop. I can't say that something abnormal is happening there, in the amazing Circassian lands, but something happened to me that still scares me. Late in the evening, I returned to my apartment. I worked a lot during the day, so I wanted to get a good night's sleep before the next day. I fell on the bed and instantly fell asleep. I woke up at night. I was tormented by thirst. Turning on the light, I got out of bed and went to the kitchen, poured water from a decanter into a glass. Having drunk the water, I went to the bedroom. The light was off. It was strange after all. I didn't turn it off. Not paying much attention to this, I fell asleep again. I woke up again because I heard frantic female screams and moans. I thought I was dreaming, but suddenly I heard it again. When I sleepily sat up in bed to see what was there, I was hit like an axe to the head. What the hell? A woman in my apartment. I'm a bachelor. I live completely alone in a one-room apartment. Where could a woman come from here? The cold ran down my back. Groans were coming from the bathroom. I went to the bathroom, turned on the light, and saw a terrible picture inside. There was a young girl lying on the floor. Her hands were cut off. A huge man leaned on her. He raped her. I looked at it with horror and could not move. My legs were like cotton. Meanwhile, after finishing his dirty work, he pulled out a knife from somewhere, cut the poor man's throat in cold blood, and came out of the bathroom through me. What I felt then, I remember for a lifetime. When the killer passed through me, I fainted. My neighbor found me in the bathroom. It turns out the door of the apartment was open, although in the evening I locked it on 3 locks. A neighbor took me to his place, and her wife Maria told me the following story. It turns out that 10 years ago a girl lived in my apartment. Everyone loved her. She was kind. She helped everyone who asked. Soon a man began to cohabit with her. The girl told everyone that the wedding is coming. But one night, the neighbors heard the girl screaming silently from the apartment. Well, we thought God knows what they were doing, didn't pay any attention, especially since before that couple had made noisy love a lot. And a few days later, the neighbors smelled a corpse from that apartment. They called the police, broke down the door, entered the bathroom, and saw a terrible picture. The girl was lying there dead. Her hands were cut off and her throat was cut. I quickly announced the sale of the apartment, but until I found a buyer, lived with a friend. Now I've got a brand new 2-room apartment that no one's ever lived in before. This story happened a year before I was drafted into the army. In 1998, we got the house for literally a pittance, $200 for a good 5-room house. Agree? It's cheap. Some gypsies lived there before, but it was almost in order. A couple of days after the purchase, I stayed overnight in it. There was no furniture, so I piled 3 blankets on top of each other and slept on the floor. At night, I was awakened by a strange sound like a mouse, or maybe a rat, but right under my ear, scratching and scratching. The recipe is proven you need to mix plaster with glass and pour it into the hole. Let it gnaw. By morning, I just moved the bed, listened to some noises, decided that I needed to get a cat, and fell asleep. The next day I got busy and completely forgot about this matter until the evening. I was a little surprised that they were scratching not where they were yesterday, but almost under the place where I moved the bed. Well, okay, I knocked on the floor, meowed, moved the bed, and fell asleep. In the morning, I regretfully tore off the baseboard, rolled up the linoleum, mixed the mixture, and tore off the top board of the floor to pour the solution under it. Then I drilled a round hole with a crown and saw something white. Prying the boards, I froze. There lay a human brush, rather, the skeleton of a brush, unevenly broken bones with remnants of black, no longer smelling meat. I continued the excavation and saw that under the floor the earth and the slag pillow were dug up by passages, and the lower board was gnawed to half the thickness. There was no body, only this hand. I burned it in a fire, shattered the annealed bones with a hammer, and poured the crumbs into a sewer manhole. In the church, I took holy water and just in case sprinkled the floors. Unfortunately, it didn't end that simply. I was now sleeping lightly with a knife in my hand and woke up not from the noise but from an unbearable stench. It smelled like a dead dog. There was no one in the room, the door was locked, but there were earthy lumps near the bed, and a dirty bare footprint was imprinted on the sheet. I didn't sleep there anymore and dissuaded my mother and father, referring to the caracurts that I saw there. When I was drafted, I asked my father not to go into the house. He was a bit superstitious, and he obeyed. 3 months later, the house burned down. Probably the neighbors helped, as it caught fire immediately from 6 places. I'm afraid that its history died in the fire along with it. I'm glad I didn't open the door. It was an ordinary morning, autumn, cloudy. My sister had already gone to work, and I was getting ready for school and was supposed to take my niece to kindergarten on the way. We were already in the corridor, almost dressed, and then there was a ring at the door. I was, of course, surprised. There was no peephole, and I asked, "Who's there?" Silence. And then my niece, pointing at the door, said, "There's an auntie." And she, like many children at this age, saw either non-existent uncles or a cat, or just said, "He's looking at me." We, of course, distracted her or said that we would drive everyone away now. But that morning I felt uneasy. I couldn't understand, could she see through the door? The bell rang again, and I began to be seized with fear. I stepped back a few steps from the door and stood. I was slightly shaking. I gestured to my niece, "Quiet, be silent." And she whispered to me, "There's an auntie, she's scary," and was about to cry. I just believed her. I grabbed an umbrella and yelled, "Get out, I won't let you in." And then I heard someone hawk at the door and clearly shuffling, receding steps. We live on the 9th floor, and the noise of the elevator is well heard from the apartment. After some time, I heard the elevator go down with a stop on the 8th floor. I approached the window in a state close to fever. The windows overlook the yard, and I started watching the entrance door. First, a neighbor from the 8th floor came out, and after him, a woman slowly began to descend the stairs. She walked across the yard towards the road. I froze, hearing the pounding of my heart. I recognized this witch. The woman was wearing an old gray dress in which she was buried, and most importantly, her limping gait was hers. I would not have confused her with anything. Suddenly the witch stopped, turned around, and started looking up. It seemed to me that she saw me. I couldn't make out her face, tears were in the way. Unable to bear it, I squatted down. My niece pulled me out of my stupor. She tugged at my sleeve with the words, "Are we going to kindergarten?" That day I didn't go anywhere. I didn't approach the door at all. I was scared. I am glad I didn't open the door. And the next day I casually asked my niece, "What about the auntie? Where did you see her?" And she answered me, "So here she is, standing behind you. Turn around."